On this edition of the Current International, Germany decides. Angela Merkel will remain Chancellor of Germany, but results show that her party has lost support. What does this mean for the next 4 years? And taking the spotlight, the Alternative for Germany party. The right-wing extremist party will finally be a part of the German parliament, controlling just under 100 seats. We'll be joined by a live expert who will break it all down, and we'll hear from a first-time voter on what it's like to be a part of Generation Merkel. The Current International starts now. Quiet has returned to Alexander Plaza in Berlin 24 hours after demonstrations against the right-wing extremist party started. Hello and welcome to the first ever edition of the Current International. I'm Sophia Bosk and we'll have more on those protests later. Angela Merkel and the Christian Democrats are faced with a disappointing victory, losing seats in the German parliament. Some of these seats will now belong to the far-right Alternative for Germany party. Merkel's CDU-CSU alliance won the biggest percentage of the popular vote with 34.7%. Behind them, the Social Democrats won 21.6%. This is a tough defeat for a party now facing an identity crisis. The far-right Alternative for Germany party is coming in third with 13.3% of the vote. This is the first time that they've surpassed the 5% needed for a party to enter parliament. The left, the Green Party, and the FDP are just behind that, coming in at a combined total of over 30% of the vote, which the CDU will need in order to form a coalition. Inside the German parliament, there are two results to highlight. First, Merkel's CDU-CSU alliance won the majority of the seats, 246 in total. They'll look to the Free Democrats and the Green Party to form a coalition government later on. Second, the far-right Alternative for Germany party won 94 seats. Although they will not be in the ruling government, this is the first time that a right-wing extremist party has held any seats in parliament since 1945. Many were shocked by the results and the right-wing party, the AfD's, strong win, including all of those who took to the streets in Berlin to protest. Sullivan is our eyes and ears on the ground in Germany, and he is reporting for us in Berlin. Cole, what have you seen over the past 24 hours?
Sophia, it's all calmed down here after a night of protests in Berlin, after people realized just how many votes the AfD was actually going to get. Once the results started coming in, a group of several hundred people gathered outside of the building where the AfD was meeting. Some even threw glass bottles. The other big headline here, Merkel will remain chancellor, but she's going to have to build a completely new governing coalition, and that's going to be hard because the CDU didn't get as many votes as they expected. All this to say, the voting may be over, but this election is far from done. The Berlin Marathon, a race of anticipation, achievement, and exhaustion as finishers limped towards the German parliament building, not unlike another race that ended Sunday in Berlin.
Today is a day where we can say we have received the task of taking on responsibility, and we will show this responsibility in negotiations with others.
Negotiations to create a new government, one that will replace the Great Coalition. And that's something voters at this polling place in Berlin support.
Great coalition always means standing still.
Every change has a chance.
But for Merkel's CDU party, with change comes challenge.
It's going to be a challenge, but it's also going to be very, very interesting because for years people wouldn't have thought this would be possible. But now, this might be a chance also to get back those voters who were not happy.
And while many of the students and young people supporting Merkel here say they're sure it will all work out,
yeah, optimistic that it will be a good coalition government, and I'm very sure about that.
Donors and party elites were less enthusiastic with their applause when the numbers were announced.
And they were not good because we lost many votes.
Many of those lost CDU votes have gone to a new party, the far-right AfD. They're anti-Islam and anti-immigration.
I'm absolutely convinced that the immigration thing is one of the
factors that has the greatest impact on this election, yes.
The impact from Merkel's decision to open Germany's doors to refugees and immigrants from the Middle East.
She's been very courageous and very unpolitician-like in taking a positive stand on letting refugees into Germany.
Miriam Habibi is an international relations professor who says the backlash could have been even bigger.
Given that Merkel's policy was to let in so many more refugees than other European countries.
But the 13% the AfD won still sent protesters into the streets overnight, chanting "Nazis, get out." And it sparked a sense of dismay from voters.
Of the history of Germany, I think it's never a good sign when parties like the AfD will rise up and speak about hate.
One thing everyone here can agree on, like it or not, Merkel will continue as Germany's leader. And some people like that a lot.
I think Angela Merkel has shown that she is brilliant as both international and domestic politics.
Actually, I like her, not only because she's a woman in such a powerful position.
She did now the last years a very, very good job because she's familiar with her job.
But with these results, Germany enters unfamiliar territory. And unlike these beer drinkers who finished their marathon, Chancellor Merkel and the German government have a long road ahead. And that road leads here to the Reichstag, the seat of the German parliament. That's where Angela Merkel will have to form a new governing coalition. And with the SPD saying they're not going to participate in what was called the Great Coalition, that means there's going to be a new governing body completely untested on the national level, and it's going to take several months to get to that point. Sophia, back to you.
Thank you. Cole Sullivan reporting for Berlin. We are now going to specifically explain how German citizens vote for parties and how the seats in parliament are filled with our specialist, Aziza Kasumov. So, Aziza, how did Merkel become the new chancellor?
Merkel actually didn't get elected yet because what Germans were asked to vote for on the Sunday election was the Bundestag, which is the German parliament, not for Angela Merkel directly. Her name was not even on the ballot. The German election system is actually one of the most complicated ones in the world, but that's why political scientists say it's also one of the fairest ones.
So if it is so complicated, could you break it down for us a little bit?
Sure, we'll start by looking at a typical German ballot. As you can see, Germans were required to cast 2 votes, one on the left-hand side, one on the right-hand side. We'll start with the one on the left, which is called the first vote. The first vote basically works like an election for the US House of Representatives, with every district having its own candidate and choosing one candidate to send off to parliament. Whoever gets the most votes wins, no absolute majority needed. Let's take, for instance, Ludwigshafen-Frankenthal, which is a district in the state of Rhineland-Palatinate.
Sorry, but isn't that where you're from?
Yes, that's where I'm from. That was where I was asked to cast my vote. I'm not going to tell you who I voted for, but those were the candidates who were in the run. Torbjörn Kardes won. He's a Christian Democrat with 32% of the vote in that district, so he was able to secure his seat in parliament right away. The other candidates weren't. Germany has about 299 of those districts, which means that 299 of the Bundestag seats are filled with the first vote.
And where does the other half of the parliament come into play? Is that the second half of the ballot that we saw earlier?
You guessed it. That's how the other 299 seats actually are filled. So we're going to talk about the right-hand side of the ballot now, which is called the second vote. The way this works is that people here are asked to cast their vote directly for one of the parties on the ballot. The ones that were on this year's ballot were the Green Party, for instance, Free Democrats, of course, Christian Democrats, Angela Merkel's party, SPD, we had the left-wing party, Alternative for Germany, and other parties who are in the run typically don't get that many votes. But the way this works is the remaining 299 seats are then distributed according to a party's share in that second vote. So let's take, for example, the CDU. They got 33% of the vote. So that means the party will occupy 33% of the 299 seats reserved for the second vote. Make sense?
I got it. And yeah, I understand how the 598 parliament seats are filled. But how does Chancellor Merkel get elected if she isn't even on the ballot?
So the way it works is that the parliament votes for the chancellor, but in order for that to happen, they need to have an absolute majority. That's the catch. So typically a party never would get the absolute majority just with their own votes. For example, the Christian Democrats, who were the strongest segment in this year's election, they're far from getting the absolute majority.
That's Angela Merkel's
That's
party.
Angela Merkel's party, exactly. So typically in the past, we've seen a coalition with Social Democrats. That would be an option for them to have the absolute majority this year. But with Social Democrats saying they will go into opposition, that's off the table for now. Christian Democrats are also not going to coalition with Alternative for Germany or the left-wing party, which basically only leaves us with the Green Party and Free Democrats left for a coalition. And as you can see, that would be enough for an absolute majority in the seats and for Merkel to be re-elected as Chancellor. Once negotiation talks are concluded, which typically takes about 2 months, Merkel is then elected Chancellor officially.
Well, thank you so much, Aziza. That makes a lot more sense. Joining us now is Professor Alexander Clarkson, who teaches at the King's College in London, German and European Studies. Dr. Clarkson, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, thank you very much.
So the Alternative for Germany party won 13% of the popular vote. How do you make sense of this surge in right-wing extremism?
Well, only part of the AfD is extremist in the broadest sense. It has a strong neo-Nazi factions and strong hard-right factions, but there are other elements of the party that simply reflect national conservative points of view that were gradually marginalized over the course of the 2000s, but were relatively mainstream as late as 1999. In 1999, a senior CDU politician, Roland Koch, ran a radical anti-immigrant campaign and won election in the state of Hessen. So in many cases, what the AfD is running is a campaign that both attracts elements of the radical right as well as national conservatives who once belonged to the German political mainstream, but have felt excluded from it over the past few decades. It's a much more complex phenomenon that's often portrayed in the US and UK press. And to understand it, it's worth looking at recent German history and looking at opinions and ideas that may seem marginal now, but are actually accepted and discussed by large parts of German society and considered quite mainstream by them.
And Merkel is entering her 4th term. How do you think that this will affect Germany over the next 4 years? In other words, is there a danger that there will be an absence of change? Is that the reason that the alternative right has seen a rise?
The alternative right has partly seen a rise out of a frustration of the fact that Merkel has been around for so long. There are significant parts of German conservative public opinion that would like to see a change, would like to see a shift. If the CDU or CSU replace her in the next year or two, we might see the return of a lot of AfD voters back to the CDU mainstream. Merkel is actually going to work to try to attract some of these conservative voters back, but she'll be constrained by the economic liberals of the FDP and the social liberals of the Green parties that will be very likely to be in her next election. So the net result is going to be that Merkel will struggle to see these voters come back, and it's very likely that she will not be standing for election at the 2021 elections, the next time we have Bundestag elections in Germany.
And just a quick question, Donald Trump has mentioned the idea of a leader of the free world. Do you think that Angela Merkel is the new leader of the free world?
I think this is sort of a charming idea you often have in US and UK press. Germany doesn't have the political and military capacity to lead the free world, and to focus so exclusively on individual leaders rather than whole political parties and movements sort of misses the point of the German political system or the way the EU functions. The EU functions through balances and compromises of wide-ranging and large political movements and political parties that over decades develop compromises to push projects forward like the European defense integration. So to fixate so exclusively on one individual leader misses the point. Merkel is not the leader of the free world. Germany will not be the leader of the free world. But the United States might want to work with a variety of different leaders and political parties to pursue any kind of agenda it wants. So I think to describe her the leader of the free world misunderstands the way European politics work and the very broad range of different political figures that have a say in Germany. It's not all up to Merkel. Merkel has to balance all kinds of different forces and figures. She is first among equals, not the commander-in-chief.
Well, Dr. Clarkson, that is all we have time for today. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you very much.
And Germany was not the only place where German voters watched last night's election results roll in.
Von 71,5% vor 4 Jahren auf jetzt 77%.
German expats gathered in Los Angeles for a breakfast watch party where they discussed the night's results over coffee and quiche. Many had voted in the federal election by mail, but still chose to get up early to watch the results with other Germans.
It's always important to have a dialogue about what happens in Germany and to stay, keep it posted and to make your vote even from here with letter.
Our reporter spoke with the German Consul General in Los Angeles, Hans-Jörg Neumann. Neumann expressed concern over the rise of the Alternative for Germany party. He says the issue of refugees had an impact on the election.
Then there is a big percentage of protest voters, people that wanted to say to the government, we have enough of certain policies, and you should not forget the AfD was very clever to play the card refugee issue. Lots of Germans are afraid of the huge number of refugees, and that of course helped them quite a bit.
Yet Neumann does not see any threats to the United States-Germany relationship.
I think almost all the parties have never had a doubt that the German-American relations are a pillar of our foreign policy. No matter what party is in power, they will always work together with the United States.
We are now joined by Marie Kaufmann, who was also at the German consulate event yesterday. She is a first-time voter and a German citizen living in Los Angeles. Marie, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
So my first question for you is, you're often considered part of what is Generation Merkel, which means that Merkel is the only chancellor that you've ever known. How do you feel about her now entering her fourth term, another 4 years? Do you think that this absence of change may be difficult for democracy?
Well, I think Angela Merkel is a very brilliant person. She has done great politics in the past years. In those difficult times, she kept it cool and she always thinks before she does something. I think she's very important for our society right now. She's a constant and people trust her in her politics. So I grew up with her. She's been in office for 12 years. So I'm positive and excited that she has the opportunity to pursue her political beliefs and see what happens in the next 4 years.
Are there any things specifically that you're hoping Merkel will accomplish?
Well, we've seen the rise of the AfD, so I think the most important task she's going to do is try to reunite Germany in the sense that those people who have left the CDU and CSU and did vote for the AfD, she has to try to address their fears and anger and win them back. So hopefully in 4 years at the next federal election, those people will not vote for the AfD anymore, but for her.
Got it. And Merkel is sometimes explained or described as someone who struggles to identify herself as a feminist. How have you seen her leadership affect German women and just the idea or the perception of women in Germany as a whole?
Well, me personally, I don't need her to call herself a feminist. I think her being in office successfully and being one of the most important and powerful women in the world has shown us and the women in Germany that a woman can be in such a position and be successful. For me personally, she's a role model, definitely. So I really think that she had a positive impact on women in Germany.
Well, thank you, Marie, so much for your time. We appreciate it. Now let's see how Germans reacted to the results on social media. Aziza Kasumov has taken a closer look.
Yes, and what we've seen ever since first exit polls were released really was a massive divide among the German electorate. Both supporters and opponents of the right-wing Alternative for Germany voiced their opinions loud and clear on social media. Let's start by looking at the hashtag 87%, which was initiated by the German newspaper Zeit. Reporters asked readers to share their reasons for being part of the 87% that did not vote for right-wing extremists in this year's election. The hashtag started blowing up around 7 p.m. local time, an hour after polling stations had closed. It spread quickly across Germany, and by now over 10,000 Twitter users, that's a lot for Germany, had already used it to state why they stand against right-wing extremism. But if you take a closer look at this map of where the hashtag was used, you can actually see another divide that's become quite evident, and it's a political divide between the eastern and the western parts of Germany. In the east, where the Alternative for Germany came in as the strongest party in one of the states, the hashtag was used only sporadically. Analysts later confirmed that indeed voters in the east were twice as likely to give their support to the Alternative for Germany. In Berlin, where hundreds gathered to protest the party, the hashtag was most prominently used, with Berliners citing a commitment for open borders, refugees, and tolerance as reasons why they stand against the Alternative for Germany. Our correspondent Cole Sullivan was on the ground, as we've seen earlier today, to cover the protests. Yet social media also allowed for a rare insight into the Alternative for Party's election night party. In this video, we can see AfD supporters getting fired up by the election losses of CDU and SPD. Later, as AfD results were announced, party supporters began cheering widely. Let's just take a closer look at that for a minute. There's been also much talk about Jamaica, and in case you're wondering why that is, here's the explanation. So Jamaica actually refers to the most effectively like the coalition that we'll see in Germany most likely in the next few years between the Green Party, the Free Democrats, and Christian Democrats. It was one of the most commonly searched things on Google. As we can see, shortly after polling stations had closed, there was a spike in search for Jamaica in Germany. Let's toss it back to Sophia.
Thank you, Aziza. And one more time before we go, let's take a look at those German election results. Angela Merkel will stay as Germany's chancellor. Her party, CDU, along with the CSU, won the majority of seats in the Bundestag late last night, 246 in total. Now they'll look to the leftist Free Democrats and the Green Party to form a coalition government. The right-wing Alternative for Germany party came in third behind the SPD. Therefore, they will not be a part of the ruling government. But this is the first time that a party from the right wing has held a seat in parliament in 60 years. Thank you so much for watching the first ever Current International. From everyone here at Annenberg Media, I'm Sophia Bosk. For more international news, you can tune into our podcast on Annenberg Radio News, Thursdays at 4 p.m., or head to uscannenbergmedia.com and click on the International tab.